Picture the scene. It's December 10th, 1520. It's freezing cold in Wittenberg, Germany. You have a monk, a man who has been causing trouble for the most powerful institution on earth for 3 years, walking out to the Elster Gate. He's surrounded by students, faculty, a cheering crowd. He's holding a document, a very specific, very official document sealed with lead, and instead of reading it or obeying it, he throws it into a bonfire.
And he doesn't just burn the paper, Noah. He burns the symbol of 1,000 years of legal authority. That document was the Exsurge Domine, the papal bull issued by Pope Leo X. It was the ultimate cease and desist letter, and Martin Luther treated it like kindling.
It is, arguably, the most famous bonfire in religious history. Today, we are talking about that document, Exsurge Domine. This is the text that officially condemned Martin Luther. It's the moment the Catholic Church said, enough is enough.
Exactly. It's the point of no return. Before this bull, there was a debate. After this bull, there was a schism.
But here's the thing that always confuses me about this timeline. Luther posted the 95 Theses in October 1517. This bull, Exsurge Domine, doesn't come out until June 1520. That is nearly 3 years of silence. If Luther was such a wild boar destroying the vineyard, why did Pope Leo X wait so long to pull the trigger?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is that initially, Leo X simply didn't care. You have to understand who Leo was. He was a Medici. He was a patron of the arts. He was rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica. He was navigating complex Italian wars. When he first heard about this German monk complaining about indulgences, he reportedly dismissed it as a quarrel among monks.
He thought it was just a squabble between the Augustinians and the Dominicans?
Precisely. He thought it was an academic turf war. Plus, the politics were messy. The Holy Roman Empire was about to elect a new emperor, and the Pope needed the support of Frederick the Wise, the Elector of Saxony. And who was Frederick's most famous subject? Martin Luther. So Leo had to tread very lightly. He couldn't just crush Luther without offending the guy whose vote he needed.
So Luther basically survived those first 3 years because of election year politics?
In a way, yes. But by 1520, the election was over, Charles V was the new emperor, and Luther had gone way beyond just complaining about indulgences. He was now questioning the authority of the Pope himself. The quarrel among monks had become an existential threat.
Right, and that leads us to the document itself. I was reading the opening lines of Exsurge Domine, and the language it's intense. It's not legalistic, it's almost poetic, but in a terrifying way. Arise, O Lord, and judge your own cause, for foxes have arisen seeking to destroy the vineyard.
It's incredibly dramatic. The title, Exsurge Domine, comes from that opening Latin phrase, arise, O Lord. It invokes Psalm 80. The imagery is very specific. It calls Luther a wild boar from the forest who is seeking to destroy the vineyard of the Lord. And there's a bit of irony there because rumor has it that when the draft of the bull was presented to Pope Leo, he was actually at his hunting lodge hunting boars.
Wait, seriously? He was hunting boars while signing the document condemning the wild boar?
Historians have debated the precise timing, but the metaphor certainly fit Leo's lifestyle. He was an aristocrat. But the man who actually drove the content of the bull wasn't Leo, it was Johann Eck.
Johann Eck. He was the guy who debated Luther at Leipzig in 1519, right?
Yes, and Eck had a personal vendetta. He had gone to Rome specifically to warn the Curia that Luther wasn't just a nuisance, he was a Hussite. He was a heretic in the vein of Jan Hus, who had been burned at the stake a century earlier. Eck was the one who compiled the list of errors. When you look at the text of the bull, it lists 41 specific errors of Martin Luther. That list is largely Eck's handiwork.
I want to drill down into those errors because when we think of Luther today, we think of justification by faith alone or scripture alone. But this list of 41 items, it's a weird mix. I was looking at it and some of them seem incredibly technical while others seem almost trivial.
It is a weird mix. And that's actually one of the historical criticisms of the document. It doesn't present a coherent counter-argument. It just says, here are 41 things Luther said that are wrong. For example, error 33.
Which one is that?
Error 33 is the condemnation of Luther's statement that burning heretics is against the will of the Spirit. Think about that. The Pope is officially condemning the idea that you shouldn't burn people.
So by condemning that statement, the bull is implicitly affirming that burning heretics is the will of the Spirit.
Exactly. It solidified the church's stance on using force to suppress heresy. Then you have errors about purgatory, about penance, about whether the sacraments give grace effectively. But there's a lack of precision. The bull groups all 41 items together and says they are variously heretical, scandalous, false, offensive to pious ears, or seductive of simple minds.
Wait, variously? It doesn't say which is which?
No. And that drove Luther crazy. He didn't know if a specific point was considered outright heresy, which gets you killed, or just offensive to pious ears, which is just bad taste. It was a shotgun blast of condemnation rather than a sniper shot. It allowed Luther to claim that the Pope was just rejecting everything, including things that were clearly in the Bible.
It sounds like a PR disaster, frankly. If you're trying to win the hearts and minds of the German people, sending a confusing legal document drafted by a guy who everyone in Germany already hates, that seems like a bad strategy.
It was a terrible strategy. When Eck went back to Germany to publish the bull, because remember, a law isn't a law until it's promulgated locally, he had a nightmare of a time. In some cities, mobs attacked him. In others, the local bishops refused to publish it because they said the document was too vague. Eck had to hide in a monastery in Leipzig because the students were threatening to kill him.
So the bull actually galvanized support for Luther?
Completely. It forced people to pick a side. Before Exsurge Domine, you could be a moderate who thought Luther had some good points about corruption. After Exsurge Domine, you were either with the Pope or with the wild boar.
Let's talk about the threat in the document, because it wasn't an immediate excommunication, was it?
No, and that's a common misconception. Exsurge Domine was a warning shot. It gave Luther 60 days. 60 days from the time he received the bull to recant those 41 errors. If he didn't, then he would be excommunicated. It was a countdown clock.
And Luther, being Luther, used those 60 days to write even more aggressive pamphlets.
He went on a writing spree. He wrote against the execrable bull of the Antichrist. He didn't just disagree with it. He framed the Pope as the Antichrist for issuing it. He argued that by condemning the truth of the gospel, the Pope had revealed himself to be the agent of Satan. The rhetoric was apocalyptic.
Which brings us back to the bonfire. The 60 days are up. It's December 10th. What exactly happened at the Elster Gate?
It was highly choreographed. This wasn't a spontaneous riot. A notice was posted at the University of Wittenberg inviting students to a burning of godless constitutions. They built a pyre. They burned books of canon law, which is significant, Noah. Burning the bull is a personal insult to the Pope. But burning the canon law, that's rejecting the entire legal system of the church. It's like an American burning the Constitution.
And then he tosses the bull in.
He does. And he reportedly said, "Because you have confounded the truth of God, today the Lord confounds you. Into the fire with you." It was a ritualistic counter-excommunication. The Pope had cut Luther off from the church, so Luther cut the Pope off from the church.
That is the moment the Reformation really starts, isn't it? I mean, 1517 is the start of the argument, but 1520 is the divorce.
It is the divorce. And proving that point, just a few weeks later, in January 1521, Leo X issued the second bull, Decet Romanum Pontificium. That one didn't have a countdown. That was the formal decree of excommunication. Luther was out. But by that point, the bull was just paper. The movement had already left the station.
I want to step back and look at the legacy of this document. We often frame this as liberty versus authority, Luther the rebel versus the oppressive church. But if you read Exsurge Domine from the perspective of a faithful Catholic in 1520, does it make sense?
Oh, absolutely. If you believe that the Pope is the vicar of Christ and the guardian of the truth, then Luther was a wild boar. He was tearing down structures that had held Europe together for centuries. The bull talks about the grief of the Pope. It says, "We can no longer suffer the serpent to creep through the field of the Lord." From their perspective, they were trying to stop a spiritual virus. They just underestimated the strength of the host.
It's interesting you mentioned the virus analogy, because the bull also commands that Luther's books be burned. It wasn't just about the man, it was about the media.
That's a crucial point. This was the first major conflict of the printing press era. The church tried to use the old method, burn the books, but there were already thousands of copies of Luther's work circulating. You couldn't burn them all. In fact, when the bull was published, printers in Germany often republished it with Luther's biting commentary in the margins. The censorship attempts actually fed the market for the controversy.
So Exsurge Domine failed in its primary objective. It didn't silence Luther. It didn't stop the heresy. Did it achieve anything?
It achieved clarity. It drew the line. Before the bull, there was a murky middle ground where you could hope for reform from within. After the bull, that murky middle ground vanished. You had to choose. And that clarity is what created the modern confessional map of Europe. It defined what it meant to be Roman Catholic in opposition to Protestantism.
It's amazing to think that a document written by a committee in Rome, signed by a pope who might have been thinking about his next hunting trip, ended up breaking Western Christendom in half.
It's a reminder that institutions often struggle to recognize a paradigm shift until it's too late. They applied a medieval solution, a papal bull, to a modern problem, a mass media revolution, and the mismatch was explosive.
If you want to read the bull yourself, then I highly recommend it. The language is truly something else. We've linked to the full text in the show notes. It really gives you a sense of the sheer weight of authority that Luther was standing up against.
It really does. It's one of those documents where you can feel the history in every sentence.
That's it for us this week. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the 16th century, send this episode to a friend who loves history.